The four-stacker is arguably one of the most recognizable icons of the Edwardian era. Starting from Norddeutscher Lloyd's launch of the Kaiser class in 1899, for almost 2 decades, they are the pinnacle of luxury, speed, and size. That is, however, until all that would come crashing down during the Great War. Due to some interesting circumstances, though, 2 obscure four-stackers would come running down the slipway after the Great War. The Union Castle Line was created from the merger of the Union Line and Castle Shipping Line in the year 1900. The older of the two, the Union Line, dating back to the 1850s. By 1913, Union Castle Line had gained its reputation as one of Britain's premier shipping companies, but not for the competitive and highly lucrative transatlantic trade. Rather, Union Castle Line provided most of Britain's essential link to South Africa, which at the time was still under the jurisdiction of the British Empire. The fleet of the Union Castle Line, however, was very humble regarding their significance, at least when compared to other major shipping companies, which were either swept up by speed measuring competitions or size measuring competitions. Their largest ships before the war were the Balmoral and Edinburgh castles, being around a not small, but also not exactly massive, 13,300 tons. In 1913, though, Union Castle Line would order yard number 455 from Harland and Wolff, and yard number 456 from John Brown and Company's shipyards. Yard number 455 would become the Arundel Castle, originally named the Amroth Castle, and yard number 456 would become the Windsor Castle. These brand new four-stackers planned for the Union Castle Line's Britain-Cape Town route were not small by any means. They both weighed in around 19,000 gross registered tons and possessed a length of 661 feet and a beam of 72 feet. They had capacity for 234 in first class, 362 in second, and 274 in third, for a total of 870 passengers, although these numbers are definitely debated upon. As for propulsion, they were equipped with turbine engines and twin screws, giving them a humble but decent speed of 17 knots. The interiors weren't insane or anything, but they were comfy and nice, with all the general amenities you'd expect from a luxury liner, like a swimming pool and gymnasium. You know, all the good stuff their transatlantic partners had. However, most importantly, they had a thermotank mechanical ventilation system, basically just a sophisticated cooling system. This was very uncommon for ocean liners at the time, and even on the most luxury liners, you would kind of have to bake in the sun whether you liked it or not, so this would have definitely gone more than appreciated. The exteriors were beautifully proportioned, and because of the advantage they had of being designed after the sinking of the Titanic, they possessed more than enough lifeboats and even some gantry davits. The ships were also divided into 12 different watertight compartments, and both were equipped with double hulls as well. They were not necessarily very impressive and were nowhere near breaking any records, but they were logical steps for the company. Most importantly, they lived up to their luxurious counterparts on the transatlantic trade. The world, however, was not on Union Castle's side, as just a year after being ordered, the Great War would begin. Merchant marine companies were now putting their ships to war as millions died. As for the Union Castle Line, their ships were no exception, and they were also pressed into wartime service. At first, the belief was that the war would be rather short-lived, and the Arundel Castle was laid down soon after the war started. This, however, proved to be gravely wrong, and as the war pressed on in Europe, construction of the two ships ground to nearly a halt. After the war, merchant marine fleets around Europe were devastated. Moreover, as any big war brings, the Great War brought arguably some of the most cultural change in history, shattering the optimism of the early 20th century and bringing an end to the four-stacker as a whole. So when the R.M.S. Windsor and Arundel castles were completed around 1921, the public was more than maybe slightly confused as to what to make of these. They were really ships meant for the Edwardian era, but that era was obviously shattered before they were completed. Put simply, they looked very anachronistic, and despite being brand new, looked already a decade old. This most definitely did not take away from the fact that ships were still absolutely gorgeous on the outside. The Arundel Castle would set out first, debuting on her maiden voyage on April 22, 1921. Windsor Castle would follow suit a year later on May 9, 1922. Subsequently, they were now the largest and fastest ships in Union Castle Line's fleet, and became the prime ships for Union Castle Line's South African run. Despite their interesting circumstances, though, the ships proved profitable for the Union Castle Line, and were essential for Britain's connection to South Africa. The ships would often be used for travel by South African cabinet members, with the Prime Minister of South Africa noting that their voyage on the Arundel Castle was immensely enjoyable. In a weird turn of events, Arundel Castle also was, surprisingly, the first ship to use the gargantuan floating dry dock constructed for the massive Ballin Trio. For the next few years, they would serve happy and smooth careers, with the only major mishap being Arundel Castle's collision with the 1,400-ton coaster Maud Llewellyn while she was leaving Southampton in the November of 1926. Around the mid-1920s, however, the maritime world would bring drastic change again.
This is the new German liner,
which it is thought will break the record variously claimed by the Italians and Germans. Good luck, Normandy.
Soon after the rise of Art Deco architecture amongst the Western world, the R.M.S. Mauretania from Cunard Line, which had held the Blue Ribbon for 22 years, lost it to the SS Bremen built by Norddeutscher Lloyd. Suddenly, the feverish one-upsmanship akin to that of the late Edwardian era was reignited. Now, the Union Castle Line did build bigger ships, like, for example, the MV Carnarvon Castle, which eclipsed the size of the Windsor and Arundel castles. They were not exactly interested in taking part of this one-upsmanship. This, however, did not mean their current fleet was indifferent to this change. By the 1930s, the ships of the pre-World War I era were, well, looking outdated. Most of the four-stackers were around 20 to 30 years old now, and some were already being scrapped. The only problem was that the castles were most definitely not 20 years old. They were still rather young liners at only about 13 years old by 1935. Oh look, that's my age. Definitely not scrap-worthy ages. If the Union Castle Line wanted them to serve out their full careers, they would need to heavily renovate the twins. And throughout the mid-1930s, they would carry this out. The castles would be brought to Harland and Wolff in 1936 for major overhauls. In an effort to update their exterior appearance, their four funnels were cut to two more thicker ones. Both were also given rake bows, extending their length by 25 feet, from 661 feet to 686 feet. Both were converted from coal to oil burning as well, and their top speed was increased from 17 knots to 20 knots. The gantry davits were also removed along with other changes. Despite the massive changes, however, the ships still kept the same beauty they possessed beforehand, and public perception of the renovation was very positive. In 1937 and 1938 respectively, the Arundel and Windsor Castles would return to service, and had bright futures for the rest of their careers. But similar to when they were first under construction, the world would again go to war. In the outbreak of the Second World War, both ships were requisitioned as troop transports. The ships were painted gray, their interiors reorganized for war, and many of the ship's windows in their superstructures were blocked out. The two ships were now in for the long run. On the 4th of November, while sailing 400 miles west of Ireland, the Windsor Castle was attacked by German dive bombers. In this attack, a massive 500-pound bomb would land in the ship's smoking room. Certainly, the bomb would have incurred immense devastation, yet by some miracle, the bomb failed to detonate, and the ship survived. Unfortunately, this luck would run out before the end of the war. On March 23rd, the Windsor Castle was sailing in a convoy, having left Greenock a few days prior. While sailing approximately 110 miles off Algiers, the convoy was attacked by German bombers. A torpedo, launched by one of the aircraft, hit the Windsor Castle, and she began to sink by the stern. With the Windsor Castle's immense complement of around 2,989 people, it looked like a catastrophic disaster was on the verge. Fortunately, for the crew and troops aboard, she held her ground and managed to stay afloat for 13 hours, in which other ships were able to rescue her complement, to the relief of the people on board. Only one crewman died in the ordeal. The Windsor Castle, on the other hand, would not survive, and she still remains at 37 degrees 27 minutes north and 0 degrees 54 minutes east to this day. The Arundel Castle, on the other hand, stood the steps of a very long troopship career. Even after the end of World War II and her post-war troop repatriation, Arundel Castle still kept her troop accommodations, and they were repurposed for South African immigrant berths, still under government supervision. Finally, however, in 1949, the tired Arundel Castle would be the last of Union Castle Line ships to be delivered back to the company, and she was sent back to Harland and Wolff for a much-needed refit. After her refits were completed, she would be returned back to service in September of 1950. For 8 final years, the Arundel Castle would serve the Union Castle Line's Britain to South Africa route, before finally she would be put out of service in 1958. She sailed to Chiapua in Hong Kong for one final time, before being broken up. Within her lifetime, she made 211 voyages on her South African route, and steamed a total of 3,475,565 miles, significantly more than her Edwardian transatlantic peers like the Mauretania, Aquitania, and Olympic. Her insane career spanned across many ages: her conception in the Edwardian era, her career through the Jazz Age, her wartime service in World War II, and finally, in her dwindling years, steaming all the way into the Jet Age, making her technically one of the longest surviving Edwardian era ships to ever exist.